Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to give you the essential knowledge. Today, we're tackling a really significant public health puzzle: childhood food allergies. In developed countries, these rates have just been climbing, sometimes hitting as high as, 10%?
Yeah.
But the really remarkable thing, the guidance on prevention, it's done a complete U-turn.
It really has. It's quite a dramatic shift. For decades, the standard advice was often to delay introducing those allergenic foods, hold off.
Right. Better safe than sorry, that was the thinking.
Exactly. But now, based on really compelling, robust evidence, the whole paradigm has flipped. Current guidelines actually, they advocate for early introduction as a way to prevent allergies.
A complete reversal.
Driven by some groundbreaking research, yeah.
And right at the core of this huge shift is a landmark UK study, the Enquiring About Tolerance study, or EAT study.
That's the one.
So our mission today is to dive deep into its real-world findings. We're not just looking at what it found, the efficacy numbers,
Right.
but also the surprising human challenges, what families actually faced, what influenced their success or lack thereof, and some really unexpected biological insights, especially around the infant gut microbiome. So you're going to walk away with the key takeaways, some genuinely surprising facts, and really understand the so what behind this evolving science.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the ET study itself. Can you give us the overview, the scope, the design?
Sure. So this was a really large-scale trial, properly randomized, controlled. They recruited 3,303 infants.
Yeah.
Exclusively breastfed infants.
Wow, okay.
From the general population across England and Wales. This was between 2009 and 2012. And these babies were then split into two main groups.
And those groups were?
Okay, so you had the early introduction group, the EIG, and the standard introduction group, the SIG.
Right.
For the EIG, the families were asked to introduce 6 specific allergenic foods. We're talking cow's milk, peanut, hard-boiled hen's egg, sesame, whitefish like cod and wheat.
6 specific ones. And starting early.
Very early. From just 3 months of age, alongside continued breastfeeding. And the goal wasn't just to taste, it was sustained consumption. They were aiming for at least 3 grams of allergen protein per week.
3 grams.
For a minimum of 5 weeks, and across at least 5 of those 6 foods, all happening between 3 and 6 months old. So yeah, it was a pretty precise, quite demanding protocol.
Definitely sounds it. And the other group, the SIG. The control.
The SIG infants, they just followed the UK recommendations that were current back then, which basically meant exclusive breastfeeding to around 6 months.
Okay.
And then introducing allergenic foods whenever the parents decided after that. So yeah, 2 very different approaches set up for a clear comparison.
So the big question, what did they find initially? Was this early introduction actually safe? Was it effective?
Well, the first really reassuring thing is that, yes, it proved to be very safe. Critically, it didn't negatively affect breastfeeding at all.
Oh, that's important.
Very important. In fact, the breastfeeding rates in both the ET study groups were actually higher than the UK government data for similar mothers.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, a significant positive. And efficacy. Yes, it was there. When they looked at the per-protocol analysis now, that means looking only at the families who actually managed to stick perfectly to that rigorous plan.
Right, the ones who did everything asked.
Exactly. For them, the intervention significantly reduced the development of allergy to 1 or more foods. And specifically for egg and peanut allergies, big reduction.
Okay, so it worked for those who did it precisely. But, and this feels like a really big but,
it is.
Despite being safe and effective for the adherers, sticking to the plan, that adherence to the EIG group, it was surprisingly low, wasn't it?
Absolutely low. And this is where the human element just jumps out. Only 42.2% of the participants they could evaluate for adherence, which works out to maybe 34%, so about a third of the entire early introduction group.
Only a third.
Only about a third fully met those really strict criteria. Think about that. Roughly 2/3 of the families just couldn't fully stick to the plan.
Wow.
Yeah, this wasn't just some minor issue. It was like one of the study's biggest, most human, and frankly, most important findings. It immediately makes you ask, okay, why? Why was it so hard?
That really is the crucial question, isn't it? If the science says this works, but most people find it too difficult in practice, we have to understand why.
Precisely.
And the EP study did something quite unique here. Delving into that with qualitative analysis, looking at families' own words from questionnaires, what were the actual problems they ran into?
Okay, so the number one challenge, the thing reported most often across all the time points of the study, was infant food refusal.
The baby just wouldn't eat it.
Pretty much. Caregivers described it as a real battle of the spoon. Common reasons were things like the baby physically struggling to swallow or genuinely seeming to dislike the taste egg came up a lot there.
I can imagine egg might be tricky.
Yeah. Or, the baby was just unwell. Like one quote said, baby ill with chest infection and then stomach bug. Or maybe they were teething, trying to introduce new, potentially challenging foods then. Really tough.
And I bet that took a real emotional toll on the parents, not just the logistics.
Oh, absolutely. The study mentioned it often led to this sense of defeat among caregivers. They might start out positive, determined to persevere.
Sure.
But as the fussy eating continued, it just wore them down, a growing sense of defeat. And what's really telling is that this infant refusal, it was proportionally higher among the non-adherent caregivers right from the beginning. It was an immediate roadblock for many.
Okay, so refusal was huge. What else came up? There was this fear factor you mentioned, concerns about reactions.
Yes, exactly. That was another major theme. Caregivers' deep-seated concerns about reactions and intolerances. And you can see how that caution was fueled by, decades of history perceiving these foods as potentially dangerous.
Right. The old advice lingers.
It does. So caregivers reported worries about digestive issues, like one parent said, "My baby seems to get very constipated when he eats egg," or skin problems like eczema popping up, or just general uncertainty about symptoms they were seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And this often led to a really strong need for reassurance from specialists. But here's what's striking. The number of families reporting potential reactions was way higher than the actual number of kids with confirmed allergies.
Now, interesting. So perception versus reality.
Big time. For instance, 33 families reported those immediate IgE-type symptoms to milk, the classic rapid allergic reaction signs.
Yeah.
But testing showed only 2 of those infants actually had a confirmed milk allergy. And again, like the refusal issue, these concerns about reactions were proportionally greater among the non-adherent families early on.
So a lot of perceived problems driving non-adherence, even if they weren't actual allergies. And then there were just the practical issues, the day-to-day grind.
Yeah, theme number 3, practical problems. This really hit home how the regimen itself impacted the caregiver's ability, their capacity just to keep going.
What kind of things?
Well, initially, hurdles often involved the food prep itself, getting that palatable consistency and desired taste. It's not always easy with baby food.
No.
Someone shared egg, very difficult to get into smooth consistency, and I cannot make the baby eat the whole recommended amount. There were also worries about overfeeding, or that giving all this extra food, the increased volume, might reduce their breast milk intake.
Okay, understandable concerns.
Definitely. And then, as the study went on, sort of later in the introduction period, lifestyle inconveniences started to dominate more. Things like family holidays, travel, parents going back to work.
Real life getting in the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nurseries sometimes wouldn't allow allergenic foods or just sourcing the specific items needed, and overall time management, just fitting it all in. Interestingly, this practical theme was actually proportionally less common among the non-adherent families initially. Yeah, which kind of suggests that even the families who were managing to adhere reasonably well early on still found the logistics increasingly challenging over time.
Okay, so the daily challenges were clearly immense. But looking beyond those specific reported hurdles, did the study find that certain families or situations were just inherently more likely to struggle with adherence? Were there clear predictors?
Yes, absolutely. There were some very clear demographic predictors that emerged. For instance, older maternal age specifically, moms who were median 33 years or older.
Okay.
They were significantly more likely to report that infant refusal we talked about, and also more likely to delay introducing solids in general.
Interesting. Any others?
Yes, non-white ethnicity was also significantly associated with non-adherence and delaying solid food introduction. And a lower maternal quality of life, especially in the psychological domain, things like stress, anxiety, mood.
Right.
That was independently and significantly linked to non-adherence, too.
So it paints a picture of families maybe already juggling extra stressors, even before adding this complex feeding plan. What about factors relating to the baby themselves?
Yeah, good question. The strongest predictor of non-adherence by far was parent-reported feeding difficulties by 4 months of age.
So early signs of trouble eating.
Exactly. 40%, 40 of the non-adherent families reported feeding problems by 4 months, compared to only 20% of the adherent families. Huge difference.
Wow.
Also, parent-reported IgE-type symptoms, again, those quick allergy-like reactions, even if not a confirmed allergy, they were also strongly associated with stopping the protocol.
Okay. But what's really compelling, maybe even surprising, is what wasn't a predictor.
Yes, this is key. Enrollment eczema. So having eczema when they joined the study, surprisingly, that wasn't significantly linked to overall non-adherence, though it did link to not giving certain individual foods sometimes.
Okay.
And perhaps even more surprising, pre-existing sensitization to allergens based on IgE blood tests done at the start, also not significantly associated with overall non-adherence.
So that suggests the struggle wasn't necessarily, my baby's already allergic, that's why they're refusing.
Precisely. It points much more towards the broader challenge of consistently introducing these new, sometimes difficult foods, maybe combined with a perception of issues, rather than an underlying allergy necessarily driving the refusal in most cases.
That's a really crucial distinction. It wasn't just about the allergy itself dictating the feeding behavior for most. And the public health implications of this high non-adherence, they're pretty significant, right?
Oh, absolutely massive. That non-adherence rate, around 58%, was like 10 times higher than the actual food allergy rate they found in the study overall.
10 times higher.
Yeah. And critically, those specific groups we just talked about, the non-white families, the older mothers, those with lower maternal quality of life, the infants with early feeding difficulties or eczema, they disproportionately contributed to the overall food allergy burden in the study population.
So the ones who struggled most were also contributing more to the allergy problem.
Exactly. And the study even did some modeling which suggested something quite profound. If we could somehow achieve an adherence rate of 85% just within these identified high-risk groups,
Okay.
we could potentially see a substantial reduction, maybe up to 49% in the overall burden of food allergy in the general population.
Almost half.
Almost half. It just powerfully underscores how vital it is to provide specific, tailored support. It's not enough to just tell parents what to do. We need to give them the practical, emotional, maybe even culturally sensitive support to actually do it successfully.
That's a huge takeaway. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Beyond just the allergy prevention numbers, the EAT study also gave us this fascinating peek into the microscopic world inside the infants. Reshaping their inner ecosystem, you said. Let's talk gut microbiome.
Yeah, this is where the study offered some really unique insights. They mapped out the gut microbiota in these exclusively breastfed 3-month-olds and found it's incredibly diverse, even at that young age. It kind of fell into 3 distinct clusters.
Clusters, like different types of gut communities.
Sort of. Some babies had guts rich in bifidobacterium, often called friendly, beneficial bacterium.
Right.
Others were rich in bacteroids, which we now know is really crucial for immune system maturation. And then there was a third group dominated by Escherichia shigella.
Okay.
And what's important is that these communities aren't static. They're highly dynamic, naturally changing over time, generally maturing towards those bacteroids-rich communities by the time the baby is 1 year old, gradually looking more like an adult-like gut microbiome between 6 and 12 months.
And what was the biggest factor influencing what that gut looked like at 3 months?
The single most significant factor, hands down, was the mode of delivery, how the baby was born.
C-section versus vaginal birth.
Exactly. Specifically, infants born by cesarean section had a noticeably reduced abundance of bacteroids compared to babies born vaginally. And that's key because, as we just said, bacteroids seems important for immune development.
Right. Okay, so that's the baseline picture.
Yeah.
Now, what happened when they introduced the allergenic foods early? What did that do to the developing microbiome?
This is where it gets really compelling. The early introduction of solids in that EIG group, it significantly promoted an increase in Shannon diversity.
Shannon diversity.
Yeah.
It's a measure of richness and variety.
Exactly. More different types of microbes, more evenly spread. So their gut microbiota at 6 months was significantly more diverse compared to their own baseline at 3 months and compared to the standard group.
So the food diversified the gut.
Yes. And this dietary intervention also seemed to encourage an influx of specific microbes, genera belonging to Prevotalaceae, for example, and also some proteobacteria like Escherichia shigella. Now, these are groups often associated with high-fiber diets and sometimes linked to healthier outcomes in other studies. It really suggests that introducing solids early, even while still breastfeeding, actively and, it seems, healthily diversifies the infant's gut.
That's a powerful link. Early diet shaping the gut community.
Yeah.
Did they connect any specific bacterial findings to clinical outcomes, maybe like eczema?
Yes, they did find a link there. An increased abundance of one specific type of bacteria, Clostridium sensu stricto, which is sometimes associated with inflammation. Having more of that at 3 months was associated with both the presence and the severity of atopic dermatitis, eczema, at both 3 months and 12 months.
Interesting. So a potential gut-skin axis connection there.
Yeah, it definitely opens up an important avenue for future research into those connections.
So, okay, we're seeing these definite shifts in the gut bacteria, diversity increasing with early feeding, and even specific bacteria linked to eczema severity. But what about the big one? Was there a direct link found between these microbiome changes and the actual development of food allergy itself?
And here's the really important caveat, a reminder of just how complex these biological systems are. Despite all these significant shifts they observed in the gut microbiota, and despite the links to eczema, the study found no statistically significant association between the observed gut microbiota changes and the development of food allergy itself.
None, really.
None that reached statistical significance in their analysis. This suggests that, well, maybe the gut microbiome's role in allergy prevention is more nuanced, perhaps indirect, or maybe it involves mechanisms or microbes not fully captured by the methods used here. It really highlights how much more we still need to learn in this very intricate area.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and bring all this together then. The ET study, it's fundamentally reshaped how we think about preventing childhood food allergies.
Absolutely.
It clearly showed early introduction is safe, it's effective, but it also slammed home these very real, complex human challenges that families face trying to actually do it.
Crucial point.
We've talked about those hurdles, the baby refusing, the fear of reactions, the sheer practical daily grind. And we've seen who tends to struggle more. Older moms, non-white families, those dealing with feeding difficulties already.
Right, and identifying those factors is key.
And then there's this whole other fascinating layer, how that early diet profoundly shapes the infant gut microbiome, increasing diversity, influencing specific bacteria.
Indeed. So I think the big picture takeaway really has to be that for this evidence-based intervention, early introduction, to truly work on a population level, we absolutely have to understand and address that human element.
It's not just about the science abstractly.
Not at all. It demands tailored communication, specific support strategies for diverse families. We need to move way beyond just a one-size-fits-all recommendation. Knowing who struggles and why is the first step to actually helping them succeed.
Makes perfect sense. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought, perhaps. If these early dietary changes can so profoundly shape the developing gut microbiome, influencing key bacteria like bacteroids, which we saw is even hit by C-sections, and boosting overall diversity, what other potential long-term health benefits, maybe way beyond just allergy prevention, might be linked to these critical early microbial shifts? How much more is there still to uncover about the lifelong ripple effects of these subtle gut changes happening in our very earliest days?
That's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? A huge area for future discovery.